Hello, and thanks for joining us for a special edition of Sustaining Us, the Huntington Beach oil spill here on KLCS PBS. I'm David Nazar. On October 2nd, 2021, tens of thousands of gallons of crude oil spewed into the Pacific Ocean off the coast of iconic Surf City, USA, Huntington Beach, California. An oil pipe broke, and in a matter of hours, the oil had reached the shore and had infiltrated miles of ocean water to coastal areas of Laguna and Dana Point in South Orange County, and now even towards San Diego County. In fact, neighboring beaches had to be closed for the cleanup and also to safeguard residents from the toxic fumes from the crude oil. As a result, the Dana Point Harbor, which is about 30 miles south of Huntington Beach, was also basically shuttered for a while, and currently no boat traffic allowed there. As of now, there are hundreds of people cleaning out the oil to contain this spill. Governor Gavin Newsom has declared a state of emergency. The U.S. Coast Guard reports several cases of marine life and fish that have been killed as the effort continues to save as much of the wildlife as possible and prevent collateral damage from this environmental catastrophe. So how did all this happen, and what now has to happen? Well, we're about to find out. And joining me now to discuss all of this further is Orange County, California District Attorney Todd Spitzer. Todd is demanding accountability for this oil spill and what could or must be done from a legal perspective. He'll tell us. Also joining me is Dr. Chad Nelson. Chad is the CEO of the well-known environmental organization Surfrider Foundation. Surfrider seeks to protect and preserve the world's oceans and beaches, targeting things like water quality, the sustaining of marine life, and coastal ecosystems. And also joining our panel is Adam Almeric. Adam is an investigative reporter with the Los Angeles Times, part of the I-Team. They've really been doing great work investigating this oil spill. Thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. Now, before we begin our discussion, I must let our audience know that I sent several interview requests to Amplify Energy Corporation reps. That's the oil company we're talking about in question, and invited them here for our Zoom to get their story so their voice could be heard loudly and clearly about the oil spill for this broadcast, or even just send us an emailed statement. Well, here is the emailed reply I got from them on behalf of Amplify Energy President and CEO Martin Wilshire from what is known as Unified Command. That's the agency now dealing with all the media inquiries and questions for the oil company. The email from Unified Command sent to me says, quote, and I'm going to read here, "Thanks very much for your request. Unfortunately, Mr. Wilshire is not conducting any one-on-one interviews at this time. He is 100% focused on actively supporting the United Command's coordinated response efforts, as well as ensuring that the federal investigators working to identify the cause of the event are being provided with all the information and materials they need to reach a conclusion as quickly as possible." End quote. Not much of a statement, Adam Almeric, so let's begin with you. I want to sort of put this all in perspective. Let's set the stage for our discussion for the entire half hour. I also have to preface this as well. We don't know all the facts. We don't know everything. This is an ongoing investigation of the Houston-based Amplify Energy Corp I just referenced, as well as others involved. The jury's still out. So having said that, Adam, talk about the digging you and the team at the LA Times have been doing. I've been reading all about this possible controversial history of Amplify Energy, you know, the relation to what you folks are writing about this LA oil rig platform, the Beta field. Not too technical, keep it simple. Adam, take it from here.
Yeah, one thing that's really difficult about this story is how much we don't know and how much has been unclear, and the messaging has been sort of all over the place. So last Friday, there were some initial reports of an oil spill or oil in the water. But whether that was even connected to this spill is really not even that clear. We know that federal regulators say that very early Saturday morning, a low pressure alarm went off, indicating that maybe there was some oil spilling out of the pipeline. The company denies that's when they knew that oil was coming out of the pipeline. So, that's really unclear. What's unclear even as of this morning is the size of the spill. Now, officials are saying that it's as little as 24,000 gallons, as much as 131,000 gallons. Yeah. What exactly caused the spill is unclear. Was it a ship's anchor? They think so, but all the ships that they thought were the suspect that dragged the line and cracked it open, they haven't been able to determine that any of them had done it. So now they're saying well, maybe it happened 2 months ago and the leak sort of eventually got worse and worse, and that's where we are now. So, there's so many unanswered questions about what happened here already a week after the fact. It's very frustrating for the public and for us as reporters too.
Although as a reporter and your fellow reporters, Adam, you've done some digging. I've been reading your articles. I've been reading, you've been reporting on there's a lot of violations, things like non-compliance warnings of Amplify. Did I read correctly some bankruptcy filings? Talk about that and we'll get to the rest of the panel in just a moment.
Yeah, that's correct. So Amplify Energy is a smaller company than some of the bigger ones that have been handling these out offshore. That's kind of been a trend in the industry now. You have smaller companies taking over these offshore drilling platforms. It does have a history of non-compliance violations. It was in bankruptcy. It filed for bankruptcy just a few years ago. So it definitely, there's a history of violations there. It was fined tens of thousands of dollars over a period of time for some safety violations that a couple of them led to injuries. Some crude oil was blown out of what they call a flare boom when they're burning off excess gas. That shouldn't have happened. So it definitely, it's had some tempestuous history with regulators. So, there is that. But, one thing that we can't really say yet for sure is how much the company is at fault in this whole thing. How long did it take them before they realized there was an oil spill? How long did it take them to shut off the oil? That question is not really clear yet either. It looks like it probably took a little too long.
OCDA Todd Spitzer. Todd, talk about the accountability angle with all this. It seems all too often companies, corporations accused of wrongdoing, they sort of run from the camera. They don't speak with us. It can, as you know, from a law enforcement perspective, can take years, Todd, to get these companies to even admit mistakes, if that's the case here, and make good, so to speak. Can you talk to that, Todd?
Sure. Thanks very much for having me. First and foremost, let me break this down. I think we're really in 3 stages, if not more. Number 1 is assessing just how much oil got released, but more importantly, trying to mitigate as quickly as possible the damage to the environment, trying to protect, our coast and protect our wildlife and also all of our marshes and all the, the environmental impact. The economic impact is going to be very, very extensive. Businesses that rely on tourism in the ocean and things like that. The air show was shut down on that Sunday, and there was tens of millions of dollars that were invested in that alone. But again, our most important point here is to protect the environment. Obviously, everybody now, as the cleanup is underway and people are getting a handle on that, now everybody wants to know the cause. So that's really tranche 2. What happened? And then the third tranche is who's responsible. Monday, I was involved. So the leak happened early Saturday morning. At least the pressure dropped on early Saturday morning. They didn't report it till 6 o'clock in the morning. Or they didn't shut down their pumps at least till 6 in the morning. They didn't report it till 10 o'clock in the morning. Had they shut down their pumps and reported it immediately, maybe there would have been resources deployed to get arms around the oil as soon as it was discovered in the areas that it was seen on the surface. Be that as it may, on Monday, I'm standing next to Martin Wilshire. He's the president who denied or refused your request to come on the show. I don't blame him. He's a terrible spokesperson for the company. He makes a horrible impression, and quite frankly, he's a liar. He said on the record that Amplify didn't know about this till 8 o'clock in the morning. That's a flat out lie. All knowledge is imputed to him, and if by Monday he didn't know that the alarm went off at 2:30 in the morning, then quite frankly, shame on him and shame on Amplify. On Monday, I drove up to the Unified Command, and let me tell you how upset I was. The Unified Command, which is the Coast Guard, National Traffic Safety, all of the entities that are now working together, they are housed in the corporate office of Amplify, okay? At the 100 block of West Ocean Boulevard in Long Beach. The Unified Command should not be in the headquarters of the oil company, okay? I don't like it, I didn't like it, and what Mr. Wilshire said on Monday morning at 10 o'clock when we had our first press avail, he said his divers were gonna go back down that afternoon, back down into the pipeline. And I said, over my dead body. And that's when I really got very upset, because you don't let a potential criminal go back to a crime scene. We have to do a forensic analysis of that pipe. What happened, how it happened is not going to be determined with that pipe on the ocean floor. That pipe is going to be cut, it's going to be lifted out, and it needs to be done not by the oil company. It needs to be done by an independent third-party expert. And there's so much commingling right now between the Coast Guard and Amplify. I haven't, the federal agencies is not my jurisdiction. It's the county people. But my point in telling you all this, David, and your guests, is the way they have operated to date has been nothing, in my opinion, short of irresponsible.
So Todd, further the discussion on the narrative about accountability, sadly too often, I'm sure Adam has found this as well in years of our investigative reporting, it's crazy. When you have incidents like these, it always seems like there's some kind of dirt on these companies, whether it's an oil company, not to say exactly what's going on with Amplify just yet, or even this battery recycling plant, X-Site here in East LA, we've been covering, and all the poor folks out there that have been lead contaminated and lead poisoned. It seems no one takes responsibility. I think that's the thing here, Todd. Is someone going to take responsibility for this? What is going on with these companies?
I'm in the business of holding people responsible, generally when they don't want to be held responsible. So again, I'm part of the investigative team with the United States Attorney and the California Attorney General's office. We all have our jurisdictions. If this indeed was 4 miles out, my jurisdiction starts 3 miles in. So I want to assist the federal government, and I want to make sure that we can successfully either prosecute or hold people civilly liable. This is what always happens too, David, is they don't have enough money, and then they go after the trust fund, which is the taxpayers, right? We're always the ones that are on the hook to be responsible. You didn't mention Southern California Edison or the right in terms of the fires. I mean, companies sometimes are prosecuted, but their executives are not. And what has to happen here is you can already see Mr. Wilshire is trying to walk himself back from knowledge. If, based upon what Adam said, if you can show a history of misconduct, you're starting to make the case for knowledge, irresponsibility, lack of due diligence. And those are all important factors that may result in a criminal prosecution. And I have opened up a criminal investigation on behalf of the Orange County District Attorney's Office.
Surfrider CEO Dr. Chad Nelson. Chad, there are massive environmental catastrophes that unfortunately coincide with a disaster of this nature. Can you talk about, sort of bundle this all together, the ocean life, the marine life that's affected? Obviously there's bird species, and not just the water. I'm sure the air gets polluted, and there's a human toll. Talk about all of that, Chad.
Sure. Every time we see one of these oil spills, which also I should say happen with some regularity. So despite our efforts to improve regulations or, which the oil companies are always fighting, these spills happen all the time. So this infrastructure is just overly vulnerable. And then the other thing is, once the spill happens, the damage is done. It's too late to unwind it. So as soon as we know the spill happens, whether it's this one, the Santa Barbara spill in 2015 or others, then, as Todd mentioned, we just get into sort of damage minimization and mitigation. And the question is, how much damage will there be? And so, right, this oil also, we should remind folks, is toxic. It includes hexane and benzene. So this is not a natural substance. It's highly toxic. That's why the guys out cleaning it up are wearing hazmat suits. So, as soon as it washes on shore, obviously, the film on the water can impact marine mammals, dolphins and whales. Birds are often seabirds are one of the hardest hit animals. So we're seeing the birds in the wetlands and offshore get impacted by this. It does off gas. And so, so far the air quality monitoring results have suggested that it hasn't exceeded human health limits, but that's a concern. And it's washing up on our beaches, in our wetlands, and in our intertidal zones, which are incredibly sensitive and important habitats. Southern California's already lost 90% of our wetlands. So those wetlands of Bolsa Chica and Talbert Marsh are incredibly important. And the metaphor I've used is this is like getting gum in your hair. Like once this stuff gets into these ecosystems, it's impossible to clean it up without doing damage to the ecosystems themselves. And so, we're still in the response phase, trying to minimize this. I've heard reports that they've had tar balls wash up in Carlsbad already. So we know it's moving down into San Diego and into Oceanside. So I think we're going to have to track it. There are teams out there cleaning it up, which is really good. And the beaches are closed. I was up in Huntington on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, and it was beautiful, clear skies, great surf, and not a soul on the beach or on the water. And part of the mitigation through the natural resource damage assessment, which is the formal process to determine the fines, includes coastal recreation and economic impacts. And so those are going to be significant. I mean, as you mentioned in the opening, from Huntington to Laguna, where I am today, down through Dana Point and maybe Oceanside and San Diego are going to be closed for some amount of time.
And for those just joining us, we're speaking with Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer, LA Times investigative reporter Adam Elmerick, and Surfrider CEO Chad Nelson about the Huntington Beach oil spill. Chad, does a disaster of this type have sort of a ripple effect throughout the Southland, maybe even beyond throughout the U.S.?
In terms of attitudes about offshore drilling, I think so. I mean, we haven't added a new offshore rig on the California coast since the 80s. So that's another thing. These things are 40 years old. And there have been attempts to open up our coastline here and elsewhere to offshore drilling. The Obama administration was looking at that before the Gulf spill. And the previous administration was trying to open up all coast to drilling. There's been massive opposition to that, bipartisan, I would add. And there's a lot of calls now you're seeing to permanently ban offshore drilling, and ultimately figure out how to decommission these 27 rigs that are off the California coast. Because as long as they're there, we're going to continue to see this happen. Because it's not only the rigs, it's the infrastructure, it's the ships, it's the pipelines, it's all the components of the system that are prone to failure. And when they fail, we see these sort of humanitarian and ecological disasters.
Adam, where does your LA Times investigation basically go from here? What are you digging into now?
Well, we're still really trying to clarify the details of this incident. As I said earlier, we're almost a week into it, and so much of what happened is still not really clear and has even been contradicted in some cases. And like I said before, at first they thought this was a 3,100 barrel spill, which sounds really bad, but it looks like what they did is they took that number from an internal planning document, and that number is worst case scenario. What it looks like is if the pipeline had been severed in two, just cut in half, a full guillotine cut, you would have that volume of spill. Now we know from the video that that's not actually what happened. The pipeline cracked. And now officials are saying, well, we're not really sure it was 3,100 barrels. It might be as little as, 580 barrels, something like that. So that's a really wide range. And we're trying to understand also why did they come up with this huge estimate earlier and now it's being revised to such a much potentially smaller number? How did that happen?
Adam, what's concerning probably for you and me, we're both investigative reporters for many years. As I said earlier, it seems folks tend to run from the camera. Now there's sort of this cluster of people hunkering down together, and you can't really seem to get to the sources who have direct answers. And that is kind of concerning to me. What's your view on that?
Yeah, well, I think that, look, I'm an investigative reporter. I believe that transparency on the part of companies that are doing this kind of work on the part of the government is absolutely key to the public. It's absolutely important. They should be transparent about what's going on. And, they certainly have not really been willing to answer questions head on. They've denied certain things that the government has already alleged, but not really given a good explanation, like that 2 a.m. Low pressure alarm on Saturday. They denied that they had any indication that there was oil spilling out of the pipeline at that time, but didn't really give an explanation as to why the federal government would be saying or indicating you knew this was going on at 2 a.m. Saturday morning and the pipeline was not shut off for hours. They're just not really being forthright in explaining all of that.
Yeah.
Can I weigh in a little bit on that, David?
Yes.
Let me tell you how they set themselves up. And it's a necessary dichotomy but it's very, very frustrating. So they have this unified command. That unified command's only function is to deal with the cleanup, okay? It's not to answer questions about causation, but they set themselves up for failure and absolute stupidity because the Coast Guard stood next to the president of the company. Yeah. And you think about 50 journalists with cameras and tape recorders are going to allow you just to explain what the oil spill, the magnitude of the oil spill. You don't think they're going to want to know about causation? So one, that I said and alleged, and I think they listened to me, because on Tuesday, I went ballistic on national news and hopefully was speaking to the Coast Guard in Washington, D.C. and said, stop standing next to the president of this oil company, okay? And stop trying to explain causation when there's a whole investigative team that's housed in a completely different location. They are absolutely walled off from each other. You have a law enforcement arm of the Coast Guard, which is doing an investigation, and they cannot share information because you can't cross-pollinate for purposes of future prosecution or civil action. So as much as Adam and everybody wants to know all this information, actually, I want to make this argument, don't hit me for saying this, actually not releasing information is actually in the long run going to help protect financial recovery, potentially civilly, and or holding people accountable criminally, because we have to have a very firm wall between the investigative side and the cleanup side. I hope that makes sense.
So Todd, actually expound on that and explain it more, because I was going to ask you kind of what are the legalities of this disaster. For example, what legal action specifically could be taken, or what does this type of disaster mean from a legal law enforcement perspective? Because you're saying if they don't give information, there's something going on there. Can you explain a little bit more about the legalities of this?
Right now, the oil companies should only be giving their official documentation and providing whatever information to the agencies that are asking questions. First analysis was to make sure there's no oil coming out of that pipeline and to make sure we're reducing and mitigating any impacts. As we're starting to now evolve into the investigative stage, you can start seeing that, like Marty Wilshire is getting very nervous because there's all kinds of potential allegations about what may or may not have happened. They boarded a ship, right? They thought a German ship was the one that dragged the anchor. They boarded that ship. They apparently have eliminated that ship. So they're going to interview people. There's going to be potential suspects. There's going to be people cleared. That stuff takes time. What I'm telling you is that the federal government, the California Attorney General, and myself all have the ability to bring criminal and or civil actions. There's already been lawsuits filed by business entities who believe and are arguing that they've suffered economic loss. Surfrider Foundation may bring lawsuits, and I'm sure they are talking about it. I'm sure Chad's people are already looking at that with other entities that protect the environment. There's going to be so many lawsuits, both civil. I can't say there's going to be criminal because I don't know at this time, because I don't know what the evidence is yet. But my point, David, is there's going to be just a tremendous amount of potential litigation. Then they force us all to get together in the room on the civil side, and we all start figuring out who gets what. What I'm worried about is the deep pocket. Oil companies, they declared bankruptcy. That should tell you something about what kind of resources they have. Their shareholders dropped 50% earlier in the week because people are selling off stock. They don't want to be affiliated with this company because they're going to end up having to pay. And more importantly, like I said, there's a trust fund established when there's a shortfall in funding. So I don't know if there's going to be enough money to go around to compensate all these entities at the end of the day. But what I'm telling you now is that as much as Adam, and I appreciate all the coverage I've been reading from the press, and the LA Times has done an excellent job, I just want to caution everybody that the more you press and the more bad answers we get and the more stupid things people say, like Marty Wilshire, from the oil company, the more it potentially jeopardizes our ability to have successful civil litigation and criminal litigation.
Well, I'm going to take issue with something you said. Hang on,
Sure.
Todd, and I'll tell you. And I'm going to defend you a little bit. In fairness to you, you've been in public office, 30 years? I've been reporting on you well over 20 years, as you know. And when there have been problems in Orange County, whether it was with the Board of Supervisors or various cities or the District Attorney's Office, You didn't seem to hide stuff. I said, I need to speak with you now. And you would get in front of the camera and you would talk to folks. And I think sometimes it can be a bit of a cop-out. I get that from a legal perspective, there needs to be a case built and there needs to be a progression of the way these companies handle this. But how do Adam, how do the LA Times and PBS get answers so the public knows what's going on?
Because I'll just tell it's very simple. As soon as possible, and it should have happened as early as Monday, if not before, they should have also provided a briefing from the investigative side of this house, if you will. Right now, they've confused the public thinking that the unified command is somehow handling the investigation. It has nothing to do with the investigation, but it started answering questions about causation. Once they went down that rabbit hole, they created a disaster for themselves. So I'm hoping the United States Coast Guard and others will have a public information officer and briefings starting on Monday or Tuesday of next week. They must answer these questions, but they have to give you look, when I have a criminal investigation, I don't talk about what the evidence is. I present it in a court of law. That frustrates you, but I'm trying to preserve my prosecution.
I hear you. Chad, we have about a minute and a half remaining. You get the final word. Talk about where we go forward from an environmental perspective and the mitigation so this doesn't become an environmental disaster that has ramifications in the future for all of us.
Sure. I mean, first of all, it is going to have, implications for the future of us, no matter what we do. There's going to be, once you get oil in these systems, these natural systems, it's going to have long-term impacts. I mean, the Exxon Valdez spill from 1989, they're still seeing impacts from that. So we should just be clear that at best, there'll be some. Part of the reason it's so important to figure out who's at fault and ensure that the proper fines are levied is to try to make this as whole as possible for the public. So, environmental mitigation, restoration of the wetlands, compensation for the lost recreational opportunities and the businesses are all going to be part of that. That's going to take years. The Refugio spill happened in 2015. Plains American Pipeline, who was obviously at fault at that one, that was easy. It still took 5 years to get the $22.3 million settlement from that. So we're going to be at this for a long time. We're in the first week, and we could come back probably in 3 or 4 years and still be talking about trying to solve this problem.
Thank you so very much to our panel, Todd Spitzer, Adam Elmerick, and Chad Nelson, for a great interview on this special episode of the Huntington Beach oil spill. I really appreciate all your help.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
And we return with our regularly scheduled programming of Sustaining Us here every Monday and Wednesday evenings. And be sure to catch us on the PBS mobile app as well. Thank you all for joining us for this special edition of Sustaining Us here on KLCS PBS. I'm David Nazar.